After my husband ripped my clothes and kicked me out onto the street in the dead of winter, his mother sneered, "Let's see if any beggar will pick you up." I dialed just a single phone number, and 30 minutes later, a fleet of Rolls-Royce cars arrived. They stripped me naked, tossed me into the freezing alley like trash, and pointed, laughing. "That's where you belong," my mother-in-law sneered. They thought they'd destroyed me. But what they didn't know, my rescue was already on its way, and it would bring their entire, twisted world crashing down. To understand how I ended up freezing on a New York winter night, utterly broken, we have to go back just an hour. I was in a luxurious apartment, a place I once, naively, believed was my home. That's when the crack echoed. Not just in the room, but deep inside my soul. My husband, Ethan Hayes, had slapped me. The brutal impact sent me sprawling onto the cold tile floor, my head spinning, one ear ringing. How could the man I'd loved, truly cherished, for 5 years, the man who whispered sweet nothings in my ear every night, now look at me like a vicious animal? His eyes were burning with hatred, contempt, and a sickening delight. "Get out of my house right now, you useless woman who can't even give me a child." His voice was a low growl, each word a blade stabbing at my already bleeding heart. Through tear-blurred eyes, I looked up. There, in the bedroom doorway, stood my mother-in-law, Carol, arms crossed, a satisfied smirk playing on her lips. Beside her, my sister-in-law, Chloe Hayes, who cared only for parties and appearances, was recording everything on her phone, snickering. "Ethan, get closer to her face. This will go viral if we post it online. How about the title, Cheating Wife Gets What She Deserves?" Their cruelty, their perfectly synchronized torment, snapped something inside me. This wasn't some spontaneous outburst. This was a play, meticulously rehearsed, and tonight was their grand finale. With trembling hands, I tried to stand, trying to pull my thin, disheveled nightgown back around me. "Ethan, please calm down. I don't know what's happening, but let's just talk." I was Sophia, clinging to the faintest thread of hope, but Ethan gave me no chance. He lunged, grabbed my hair, and yanked my head back. A sharp pain ripped through my scalp, making me scream. He dragged me across the floor toward the front door, ignoring my desperate pleas, my pathetic struggles. "Talk? I have nothing more to talk to you about. You're useless to me now." Useless. Yes, that's all I had been to him for 5 long years. A tool to be used, exploited. A machine. "Open the door, Mom," Ethan yelled, and Carol eagerly pulled it wide. The cold New York winter night, a biting wind immediately swept into the apartment, chilling my skin, making me tremble uncontrollably. The small alley outside was empty, illuminated only by the dim, yellow light of a street lamp casting the shadows of bare branches. "Ethan, please don't do this. The neighbors will see us," I begged, my voice raw. But my fear seemed to excite him even more. He laughed, a cruel, guttural sound. "The neighbors? Let them see what you're really like. Let's see if you dare to face anyone after tonight." Then he did something I will never, ever forget. With all his might, he ripped the nightgown from my body. The sound of tearing fabric was sharp, final. In an instant, my entire body was exposed to the freezing air and the malevolent stares of his family. I screamed, a cry of horror and utter humiliation, desperately trying to cover myself with my arms. But it was too late. Chloe had already raised her phone. The incessant click-click-click of the camera shutter filled the air. "Wow, looking good, sis-in-law. This is going to break the internet." Her laugh was clear, chilling me to the bone. Ethan shoved me violently out the door, and I tumbled down the cold concrete steps. He grabbed my purse, emptied all its contents, scattering them in the middle of the alley. "Get out and never come back," he growled. That's when my mother-in-law stepped forward. She didn't look at me directly, but pointed a finger at a pile of filthy household garbage in the corner of the alley. Then, turning to me, she spoke each word with emphasis, a contemptuous smile marking every wrinkle on her face. "That's where you belong. Let's see if some beggar picks you up." After that, she went inside with her son, slamming the door. The sound of the deadbolt locking echoed coldly, completely severing any connection to the place I once called home. I sat there, naked, in the middle of an unfamiliar alley in the dead of winter. The wind howled, chilling me to the bone, but the cold in my heart was far worse. At some point, the tears stopped flowing, replaced by a terrifying emptiness. I felt I was no longer human, but something worse than that pile of trash. Lights in a few neighboring windows flickered on, then quickly off. They heard. They saw. But no one came out. Maybe they were scared. Or maybe, like Ethan's family, they simply enjoyed my suffering. I huddled in the darkness, feeling like I was going to die from the cold and humiliation. Asterisk, what should I do now? Where could I go? Asterisk, my mind was an abyss of darkness. Just then, a faint glow from my phone screen, which Ethan had thrown to the ground, caught my attention. The screen was shattered, but it still worked. A thought crossed my mind. A thought I had suppressed with all my might for the last 5 years. I crawled over, trembling, and picked up the phone. My numb fingers could barely swipe across the screen. I went in my contact list and searched for the one number saved as last resort. It was the number my grandfather had forced me to memorize before I left home, with the warning, call only when you truly have nowhere else to go. In the past 5 years, no matter how hard, how humiliating it had been, I had never dared to call. But tonight, I truly had nowhere else to go. I pressed the call button and brought the cold phone to my ear. It rang once. Twice. My heart pounded. Then, a familiar voice, low, warm, and yet strange, came from the other side. A voice I hadn't heard in 5 years. Hello, Mr. Albright? My voice broke. After saying those 2 words, I couldn't continue and burst into tears. Miss Sterling? Is that you, miss? Where are you? Mr. Albright's voice on the other end was filled with panic and concern. I choked back my sobs and, in a broken voice, gave him the address of this alley. Please come get me, Mr. Albright. Miss, don't be afraid. I'm on my way immediately. Just hold on a little longer. He said that and hung up. I dropped the phone, feeling all the strength leave my body. I had done it. I had made the call, broken my own promise, and asked for help from the family I had abandoned. But I had no other choice. I rested my head on my knees and waited. Every second, every minute felt like an eternity. The wind grew colder, and I slowly began to lose feeling in my body. I felt I couldn't hold on any longer. Just then, a dazzling beam of light cut through the darkness from the end of the alley. It was followed by the low, majestic roar of an engine, a sound completely out of place in this humble neighborhood. 1, 2, 3. A motorcade of gleaming black Rolls-Royces glided silently toward me like predatory beasts. The entire small alley was instantly illuminated by the headlights. The window lights turned on again. This time, no one dared to turn them off. They were stunned, horrified, and in disbelief at what they were seeing. The motorcade stopped, and the door of the lead car opened. Mr. Albright, impeccably dressed in a black suit, quickly got out. Behind him, dozens of uniformed bodyguards emerged, standing in 2 rows, forming a solid wall of protection around me. Mr. Albright took off his thick cashmere coat and placed it over my trembling body. With the warmth of the coat and the pain look in his eyes, I couldn't hold back anymore and began to cry again. Miss Sterling, you've suffered so much, Mr. Albright said in a hoarse voice. It's time to go home. By the way, if you're still with me, make sure to hit subscribe. More unbelievable stories are coming, and this is just the beginning. Would this return open a new, bright chapter? Or were more storms waiting for me? And when they discovered my true identity, what would my ex-husband's family face? The warmth of Mr. Albright's cashmere coat enveloped me, but it wasn't enough to dispel the bone-deep chill. Without another word, he helped me up with his steady arm. The bodyguards immediately formed a human wall, completely blocking the curious and malicious gazes from the surrounding windows. I knew this entire small alley was witnessing a scene they would never forget. A woman abandoned naked like a pile of trash, being picked up by a motorcade of luxury sedans. The extreme contrast was probably more dramatic than any movie they had ever seen. Mr. Albright guided me to the lead Rolls-Royce. A bodyguard held the door open respectfully. He helped me settle carefully into the back seat and then went around the car to sit beside me. When the door closed, an absolute silence and warmth enveloped me, completely isolating me from the outside world. The car's heater slowly spread warmth, thawing my fingers and toes. I huddled inside the oversized coat, staring out the window. The city's neon lights passed by like streaks of paint in the night. The car moved silently and smoothly, retracing the path I had walked in humiliation just a few dozen minutes earlier. The feeling was strange. I was no longer a pathetic victim. I was protected, on my way to a safe place. But physical safety couldn't calm the storm raging in my soul. The image of Ethan tearing my clothes, Carol's finger pointing at the trash heap, Chloe's scornful smile, it all replayed in my mind like a horror film. What did I do wrong? I asked myself 1,000 times. For the past 5 years, I had given up my identity as the daughter of a billionaire family, abandoned a life of luxury to become an ordinary wife. I cooked, did laundry, and took care of his entire family. I didn't ask for expensive gifts or complain once about a modest life compared to my past. I did all of that simply because I loved him, because I believed in his promise to build a simple and happy family. And what did I get in return? Betrayal and endless humiliation. I thought love could overcome all difficulties. But I was wrong. My love was wasted, given to a wolf in sheep's clothing, to someone who only knew how to use and trample. Miss Sterling, have some ginger tea to warm up. Mr. Albright's voice pulled me from my daze. He had taken a white porcelain cup from the car's small bar. Inside was steaming ginger tea with the familiar warm aroma of ginger. It was the tea he used to make for me whenever I had a cold. He still remembered. I took the cup with trembling hands, and the warmth spread from my palms throughout my body. I took a sip, and the gentle sweetness of honey and the spiciness of ginger soothed my throat. "Thank you," I whispered. Mr. Albright looked at me with eyes full of pity and remorse. "It's my fault, Mississippi. I should have found you sooner. I shouldn't have let you go through this." Mr. Albright had looked after me since I was a child. After my parents died in an accident, he was the one who stood by my side, taking care of every detail on behalf of my grandfather. He was more than a butler. He was like family, an uncle. He was the one who tried the hardest to dissuade me when I decided to leave my family to be with Ethan. But at that time, I was blinded by love and didn't listen to his words. "It's not your fault." I shook my head, and tears welled up again. I was the fool, the one who trusted the wrong person. Mr. Albright sighed. "Does the chairman know?" I asked in a worried voice. My grandfather, Alexander Sterling, the chairman of the Sterling Group, was a very strict and authoritarian man. That year, when I told him I was marrying Ethan, a young man from an ordinary family not up to our standards, he was furious. He gave me an ultimatum: either leave Ethan or leave the family without taking anything. And I chose love. For the past 5 years, I hadn't dared to contact my family. Not because I hated my grandfather, but out of fear. Fear of disappointing him. Fear of showing him my not-so-prosperous life. I wanted to prove to him that my choice was right, that I could live happily without my family's money. But now I had failed. I had failed miserably. "I informed the chairman as soon as I received your call," Mr. Albright replied. "He is waiting for us at the estate. He is very worried." The words "very worried" made my heart clench. I didn't know how to face him. I was afraid to see the disappointment in his eyes. The car entered the tree-lined avenues of Greenwich, Connecticut. Gradually, grand and luxurious mansions appeared, both familiar and strange at the same time. I hadn't been back here in 5 years. Everything looked the same, still luxurious and noble. But I had changed. I was no longer the naive and carefree young woman. I was a woman with a failed marriage. A woman who had just been stripped naked and abandoned in the middle of a winter night. The car stopped in front of the imposing iron gate of the Sterling family estate. The gate slowly opened, revealing the familiar white gravel path leading inside. The light emanating from the mansion illuminated a part of the sky, warm as if welcoming the return of a prodigal child. But another feeling arose in my heart. It wasn't the relief of coming home, but a flame. A flame of burning hatred. *Ethan Hayes. Carol. Chloe Hayes, Asterisk, I closed my eyes and engraved those 3 names deep in my heart. I made a vow to myself, the pain and humiliation they inflicted on me tonight, I would repay them 100,000 times over with interest. The car door opened, and I took a deep breath of the fresh garden air. I was no longer the weak Sophia Sterling of the past. Tonight, from the ashes of humiliation, a new person had been reborn. Mr. Albright carefully placed the coat back on me, covering the tattered clothes underneath, and helped me out of the car, standing in front of the heavy, exquisitely carved solid wood door, the same door I had resolutely turned my back on 5 years ago. My heart was filled with mixed emotions. Would the authoritarian man inside, my grandfather, whom I loved and feared in equal measure, receive me with open arms or with a cold, reproachful gaze? The heavy door opened slowly, without a single creak, and a warm light spilled from within, enveloping me. In the central foyer stood my grandfather, Chairman Sterling. He was wearing silk pajamas. His white hair was neatly combed, but his always dignified face was marked by deep concern. He wasn't sitting in his familiar leather armchair, but was standing, leaning on his ebony cane, staring at me. The moment our eyes met, time seemed to stand still. In his shrewd eyes, I saw no reproach or disappointment, but infinite pity and a love he had suppressed for 5 years. I couldn't hold back anymore. I let go of Mr. Albright's hand, stumbled toward him, knelt at his feet, and cried bitterly. Grandfather, grandfather, I was wrong. I was so wrong. My cries burst forth. A violent cry that contained all the sorrow, pain, and regret I had endured. The ebony cane he held fell to the marble floor with a sharp sound. He bent down, trembling, and his hands, marked by the passage of time, gently lifted my face. You're back, my child. The important thing is that you've come home. His voice was hoarse, his eyes red. He didn't scold me once. His arms were not as strong as before, but they were still the warmest and safest embrace in the world. Mr. Albright and the domestic staff standing behind turned away silently. No one wanted to disturb the tearful reunion between grandfather and granddaughter. My grandfather helped me up and sat me on the sofa. Mr. Albright quickly brought clean clothes and a glass of warm milk. Take a shower and change. We'll talk when you've warmed up. His voice was calmer, but still trembling. I obeyed and went into the familiar bathroom, which no one had used in 5 years, but was cleaned daily. The hot steam filled the room, washing away the dirty traces of this night, but it couldn't wash away the humiliation and grief deep in my heart. Putting on the soft silk pajamas, I felt as if I had shed a dirty skin. When I returned to the living room, my grandfather was still there waiting for me. He had changed into more formal attire, and on the table was a steaming pot of high-quality green tea. He motioned for me to sit across from him and said, in a low, authoritative voice, "Now tell me, what did that man and his family do to you?" And I spoke. I told him everything, without hiding anything. I talked about my 5 years of life in the small apartment, how I had to give up all the habits and hobbies of a wealthy family's daughter to become an ordinary wife. I talked about my mother-in-law's cold treatment, my sister-in-law's laziness and complaints, and Ethan's cruelty that went beyond weakness and indifference. I told him how my inability to have a child became a thorn in their side. And finally, I recounted all the horrific events of this night, from the slap, the humiliating words, to Ethan's savage act of tearing my clothes and throwing me out into the street. The more I spoke, the more I realized how absurd it had all been. I, Sophia Sterling, the only granddaughter of the chairman of the Sterling Group, raised in the lap of luxury. How could I have endured that life for 5 years just for one word? Love. A blind love that made me foolish, that made me willingly step into a fake gilded cage, only to be plucked and abandoned by the very people I cared for with all my heart. My grandfather listened in silence. His fists were clenched so tightly that blue veins stood out on the back of his hands. His face had darkened, and in his eyes burned a flame of fury I hadn't seen in a long time. When I finished my story, he said nothing immediately. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath, as if trying to suppress a rage about to erupt. Mr. Albright, he called out in an icy voice. Yes, Chairman. I want you to investigate that Ethan Hayes and his family immediately. Everything about them, their work, their businesses, their relationships, their assets, down to the smallest detail. I'm giving you 24 hours. Yes, sir. I'll take care of it immediately. Mr. Albright bowed his head and left quickly. The room fell silent again. My grandfather opened his eyes and looked at me. His gaze had softened a bit. Sophia, do you still hold a grudge against me for being so strict with you that year? I shook my head and tears welled up again. No, I understand. It was all my fault. I didn't listen to your advice. I was blinded by love. Love is not a sin, child, he sighed. The problem is you gave it to a man who didn't deserve it. But, well, that's water under the bridge. Consider it a very expensive tuition fee you've paid. The important thing is that you're back. From now on, no one can hurt you. I promise. His promise was like a 1,000-ton rock that settled my heart. I knew the real storm was about to begin. But this time, I was no longer alone. I had my grandfather, and behind me, the powerful empire of the Sterling Group. That night, I slept in my old room. It had been preserved just as I had left it. The princess bed with pale pink sheets, the white desk where I studied for my SATs, and the huge teddy bear my grandfather gave me for my 18th birthday. Everything reminded me of beautiful memories of a carefree time. I lay on the soft bed but couldn't fall asleep. Memories of the last 5 years mingled with those of my life in this mansion. I remembered the day I met Ethan. It was at a charity gala organized by the Sterling Group. He was a young employee of a partner company, handsome, smart, and with a charming sense of humor. He was completely different from the rich, entitled heirs I used to know. He captivated me with his sincerity and his dream of starting his own business. We started dating. I hid my true identity, telling him only that I was a normal office worker. He didn't seem to care much about my family background either. He loved me, or at least I thought he did. He took me to dive bars, gave me rides on his old motorcycle. Those simple dates made me happier than any fancy party. I thought I had found true love. When I decided to marry him, I brought him to meet my grandfather. The meeting was a disaster. My grandfather, with a single glance, told me bluntly, that man is not right for you. He has ambition written all over his eyes. He doesn't love you. He wants your family's fortune. I argued with my grandfather, defending Ethan fiercely. I told him he was too suspicious, that Ethan wasn't like that. The argument reached its peak when my grandfather gave me his ultimatum. With the arrogance of youth and blind faith, I chose to leave to prove him wrong. I cut off all contact on my own and entered the life of a normal person. It was difficult at first, but I tried to adapt. I fooled myself into thinking I was happy. But now that everything was revealed, I realized how right my grandfather's words had been. He saw Ethan's true nature from the very beginning, and it took me 5 years to realize it. A soft knock on the door. Mr. Albright came in with a tray of snacks. Miss Sterling, have something to eat. The chairman asked me to bring it to you. I wasn't hungry, but I sat up and ate. I knew I needed strength. Tomorrow's battle would be a long one. Seeing the exquisite food on the tray, I suddenly remembered the humble meals and my mother-in-law's reprimands. Tears fell again. But this time, it wasn't out of pain, but because I knew those dark days were truly over. A new chapter of my life was about to begin. A chapter where I would no longer be a victim. I sat in front of the cherrywood vanity and didn't recognize the woman in the mirror. My long hair, which I always wore in a simple bun, had been transformed by the country's top stylists into a mane of voluminous waves dyed a luxurious chestnut color. My pale, haggard face had been brought back to life after an intensive overnight treatment. Light but professional makeup concealed the dark circles and made my already large eyes look more defined and deep. The woman in the mirror was no longer the submissive and patient wife of yesterday, Sophia. She was the sole heir of the Sterling Group family, Sophia Sterling. Mr. Albright's voice from behind me interrupted my thoughts. Miss Sterling, the chairman is waiting for you in his study. I stood up and took a deep breath. The jade-colored silk dress that designers had brought early in the morning fit my body perfectly, creating an elegant, seductive, and sophisticated aura. I slipped on a pair of Christian Louboutin heels. Every step felt firm and authoritative. I hadn't felt this confident in 5 years. I descended the spiral staircase and walked down the long hallway decorated with expensive works of art. My grandfather's study was at the end of the hall, a spacious room with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with rare books. My grandfather was sitting behind a massive solid wood desk, carefully reading a stack of documents with reading glasses. Seeing me enter, he looked up, took off his glasses, and a smile of satisfaction appeared on his face. "Sit down," he said, pointing to the leather chair opposite him. "You look impeccable. You finally look like a sterling again." I smiled and sat down. "What did you call me for?" My grandfather didn't answer immediately. He pushed the stack of documents he was reading toward me. "Read it. This is all the information Mr. Albright has gathered overnight on your ex-husband's family." Trembling, I opened the file. The pages were densely printed with text and photos. The first page was Ethan Hayes' resume. I glanced at the basic information and stopped at his work history. The company he was a director of, Commercial Services LLC, was actually a small company founded shortly after our marriage. And what stunned me was that the company's initial capital, $350,000, was clearly registered as a personal contribution. $350,000. I remembered perfectly that when I married Ethan, he was just a simple employee with a salary of a few thousand a month. How could he get so much money? I turned to the next page and saw the company's financial reports. Over the past 5 years, the company had consistently recorded losses. The cash flow was negative, and debts to banks and suppliers kept increasing. His company was essentially an empty shell on the brink of bankruptcy. So, where did the money for his family's comfortable life, the luxurious apartment, come from? The answer was on the following pages. They were a series of bank statements for accounts in the names of Ethan, Carol, and Chloe. For the past 5 years, a considerable amount of money had been transferred monthly from an unknown account to theirs. I looked closely at the name of the holder of that unknown account, and my heart stopped. Sophia Sterling, it was my name. I didn't understand what was happening. Apart from the money I gave Carol for household expenses, I had never sent them any other money. How? How was this possible? I looked up at my grandfather and asked in a broken voice. My grandfather sighed and pointed to a small footnote on the page. "This is a trust account your parents set up for you before they died. According to their will, a fixed amount was automatically transferred each month to the account you designated as your allowance. The amount isn't very large, just enough for you to live comfortably, but not excessively. Your parents wanted you to learn to be independent." I was stunned. So, for the last 5 years, I had been living off the money my parents left me without even knowing it? That's right, my grandfather nodded. And that man knew it from the beginning. He asked for your account details to receive the money and then lied to you, saying it was his hard-earned salary to support the family. Everything clicked in my head. The image of a successful entrepreneur and family pillar that Ethan had so carefully crafted was nothing but an elaborate fraud. He was supporting me and his family with my own money while playing the role of a capable and generous husband. His hypocrisy, his cunning, had no limits. I turned the next pages of the file. My anger grew. The apartment they lived in, though purchased in Ethan's name, had been paid for in full through a shell company. And by tracing that company, it was discovered to be connected to a fierce rival of the Sterling Group. "They not only deceived you with your money," my grandfather said in a harsh voice, "that Ethan Hayes approached you intentionally. It's very likely that behind him is a larger conspiracy against our group." I closed the file, my hands and feet cold. I thought my tragedy was just a failed love story, an unhappy marriage. But no, it was much more complex and darker than I had imagined. I had been a pawn on a huge chessboard I knew nothing about. Do you understand now why I told you that you had to be strong? My grandfather looked at me with a mixture of anger and pity. This is no longer your personal problem. It's a war for the entire Sterling Group family, and you, as the sole heir, must not only seek justice for yourself, but also rise up to protect the legacy of the entire family. I looked into his determined eyes. The initial fear and confusion gradually faded, replaced by a steely determination. My grandfather was right. I couldn't remain a victim forever. I had to become a warrior. What should I do now? My voice was calm and clear. My grandfather smiled confidently. First, you need an identity. An identity with enough weight to make them tremble with fear. He picked up the intercom. Mr. Albright, have the company's lawyer, Mr. Torres, and the group's public relations team come here. A few minutes later, a group of people in suits entered the room, led by Mr. Torres, the head of the group's legal department, a middle-aged man with a broad forehead and a penetrating gaze. My grandfather gave an order in a voice that brooked no argument. Mr. Torres, immediately prepare the documents to sue Ethan Hayes and his family for fraud and embezzlement. At the same time, prepare the necessary procedures to recover my granddaughter's assets. Then he turned to the public relations team. In 1 hour, I want you to send a statement to all major media outlets in the country. A statement about the return of my granddaughter and future vice chairwoman of the Sterling Group, Sophia Sterling. The room fell into a dead silence. Everyone was stunned by the chairman's swift but authoritarian decision. Me too. Vice chairwoman. A position I had never even thought about. Grandfather, I tried to say something, but he stopped me with a wave of his hand. No buts. This position has always been yours. It's time for you to claim what belongs to you. He looked at me, and his gaze was both a command and an expectation. Get ready, my child. The storm is about to break, and you will be at the center of it. I took a deep breath and nodded firmly. Yes, I was ready. In this game, I wasn't just going to participate. I was going to set the rules. The media storm my grandfather unleashed came faster and stronger than I could have imagined. Just as he ordered, in only 1 hour, the headline, Sterling Group heir returns after 5 years, poised to assume vice chairwoman role, was on the front page of every major online newspaper. The article was accompanied by a professionally taken portrait of me from that morning where I looked beautiful, elegant, and charismatic. Mr. Albright's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Partners, investors, media outlets, everyone was in an uproar over this shocking news. On the other side of the city, in their apartment, I could imagine the faces of Ethan and his family. They would surely be speechless, unable to believe what they were seeing. The wife they had just humiliated and ruthlessly thrown out. The person they thought was a helpless lamb had suddenly transformed into a phoenix, a figure commanding the attention of the entire business world. Their elation from last night would have now turned into abject fear. But this was just the beginning. My transformation wasn't limited to my identity and my clothes. My grandfather wanted me to transform completely, inside and out. He said, a queen must not only wear a crown, she must also have wisdom and guts. The next morning, a team of the best private tutors was summoned to the estate. One taught macroeconomics and business management, another business law and legal affairs, another negotiation techniques and communication, and there was even a personal trainer for martial arts and physical conditioning. My schedule was packed from dawn till late at night. I immersed myself in my studies like a dry sponge, trying to absorb all the knowledge I had missed in the last 5 years. Financial concepts, complex laws, management strategies. At first, they overwhelmed me. But as if the Sterling family's business DNA had awakened, I learned very quickly. My analytical skills and logical thinking surprised my tutors. In the evenings after classes, I would sit with my grandfather in his study. He didn't teach me empty theories. He taught me through a lifetime of practical experience, through the game of business. He analyzed the strengths and weaknesses of each competitor, of each partner. He taught me how to read people's minds, how to use power wisely. Power doesn't lie in how many people you can command, he said. It lies in how many people you can make respect and willingly follow you. His teachings were more valuable than any book. They weren't just knowledge, but a philosophy of life, the guts of a leader. Parallel to my studies, I began my physical training. Every early morning, I underwent rigorous training with a former Special Forces member, from running and weightlifting to hand-to-hand combat. Sweat poured down my cheeks. My body ached, but I didn't complain once. I knew I needed a healthy body and a will of steel to face the coming storm. In just 1 week, I had changed. Surprisingly, I had lost some weight, but my body was more toned and full of energy. My gaze was no longer one of sadness or fear, but determined and penetrating. My demeanor had also become confident and authoritative. Even Mr. Albright commented, "Miss Sterling, you now have more presence than the chairman in his prime." The transformation was almost complete. I had identity, knowledge, willpower, and a powerful empire at my back. I was ready to make the first move in my chess game of revenge. One morning, after catching up on the company's situation through reports, I decided to visit the place I once called home. Without prior notice, I chose a white sports car from my grandfather's collection. I wore a white Chanel pantsuit, sunglasses, and my hair in light waves falling over my shoulders. When my luxury sports car pulled up in front of the old apartment building, quite a few people turned to look. I got out of the car, took off my sunglasses, and walked into the lobby with my head held high. The old doorman at the reception, the same one who had looked at me with contempt countless times, now stood up hastily and greeted me with an awkward bow. I said nothing, just nodded slightly and went straight to the elevator. I could feel the curious glances and whispers behind me. They were surely wondering who this elegant woman was and why she looked so familiar. When I rang the doorbell of the apartment, it took a while for the door to open a crack. Carol peeked out and, upon seeing me, froze. The expression on her face went from surprise and fear to uncontainable anger. "You, what are you doing here?" she stammered. I gave a polite but cold smile. "Hello, Carol. I've come to pick up some personal things I left behind." I didn't wait for her reply. I gently pushed past her and walked in. The apartment was the same, still messy and somewhat cramped. Ethan and Chloe were sitting in the living room, and when they saw me enter, they were both speechless. The TV remote fell from Ethan's hand, and Chloe's mouth hung open, unable to say anything. Their current appearance was truly pathetic. Their disheveled clothes and haggard faces were a complete contrast to their triumphant air that night. "Hello, Ethan." "Hello, Chloe," I said in an indifferent tone as if greeting strangers. "Long time no see. You don't look so well." My appearance and attitude left them completely bewildered. They just stared at me. I paid them no mind and went straight to my old bedroom. The room was the same, but not a single ounce of warmth remained. I opened the closet and took out a small wooden box I kept in the deepest corner. It was the box containing my parents' mementos, a few old photos, my father's watch, and my mother's pearl earrings. This was the only thing I needed to retrieve from this place. When I came out with the box, Ethan regained his senses and stood in my way. Sophia, you?" he stammered, not knowing how to address me or what to say. I looked at him with emotionless eyes. "Do you have something to say, Mr. Hayes?" My formal address unsettled him. We can talk first." "I'm sorry. None of this is what you think." He started singing the old song, the song of lies and excuses. But I was no longer the same person. "Sorry," I scoffed. "Do you think a sorry can erase everything? You don't need to act anymore. Your play is over." I sidestepped him and headed for the door. Carol and Chloe were still standing there, speechless. When I reached the door, I stopped and turned to look at them one last time. "Oh, I almost forgot. Starting tomorrow, people from the bank will be coming to your company about the unpaid loans. You'd better get ready. Good luck." After saying that, I turned and left, leaving behind 3 people petrified with terror and despair. As I walked out of the building and breathed in the fresh air, I felt a strange euphoria. This was just a light warning. My play of revenge still had many dramatic scenes ahead. On my way to the estate, I received a call from Mr. Albright. "Miss Sterling, our people report that shortly after you left, a huge fight broke out in that house." I smiled faintly. "Perfect. Let them tear each other apart, Mr. Albright." The psychological warfare was beginning to take effect. And now it was time to launch a real attack. An economic attack. An attack that would completely destroy Ethan Hayes' paper empire. My transformation and imposing return were merely the opening shot. A psychological blow that threw Ethan's family into chaos. But to truly destroy them, I needed concrete actions. A fatal strike at Ethan's already rotten economic foundation. Upon returning to the estate, without taking a break, I went straight to the study. My grandfather and Mr. Torres were already waiting for me. The atmosphere in the room was very serious. A large screen detailed the structure of Ethan's company and the network of related businesses. According to our investigation, Mr. Torres began, pointing to the figures on the screen. Hayes' company has debts of nearly $14 million to 3 different banks, and they are all about to mature. He has mortgaged the apartment he currently lives in as collateral for one of the loans. I frowned. So, that house isn't safe either. If Ethan can't repay the debt, the bank will foreclose on it. That's not all. My grandfather continued in his deep, experienced voice. Ethan's recent contracts are mostly small with minimal profit. His main source of income comes from 2 large contracts with 2 of our subsidiaries. These are contracts he secured because of his relationship with you. I suddenly understood. Despite his self-made man facade, Ethan had been using the Sterling family's reputation to benefit himself behind my back. So, the first step is clear, I said in a cold, determined voice. Mr. Torres, work with the legal team to find the slightest violation in those 2 contracts. A dishonest businessman like him is sure to have loopholes. We will terminate the contracts unilaterally. Mr. Torres nodded. Understood. It won't be difficult. Following the procedure, we can also claim compensation for breach of contract. Not necessary, I interrupted. Our goal isn't the money. It's to cut off his lifeline. Do everything according to the law so he can't say a word. My grandfather looked at me with satisfaction. Good. The attack must be decisive, but it's not enough. We must create greater pressure. Pressure from all directions. He turned to Mr. Albright, who was standing silently in a corner of the room. Mr. Albright, contact those banks and tell them the Sterling Group will buy all the debts of that company. Both Mr. Torres and I were a little surprised. Grandfather, why would we do that? I asked. Buying an enemy's debt is like helping him. My grandfather smiled with the cunning of an old fox. Helping him? No. Think about it. If the creditor is the bank, they will follow procedures. They might grant him extensions or negotiate. But what if the creditor is us? We won't give him a single day of extension. We will be the most insistent and relentless creditor. We will hold the power of life and death over his company. Then he will live if you want him to live and die if you want him to die. A light bulb went on in my head. My grandfather's move was truly masterful. Not only did it shift us from a passive to an active position, but it also put Ethan in a no-win situation. He would face a new, powerful, and mysterious creditor without suspecting for a moment that I was behind it all. Mr. Albright, I turned with a sharp look. When buying the debt, do not reveal the Sterling Group's identity under any circumstances. Do it through a financial intermediary company that has no apparent connection to us. Don't worry, Miss Sterling. I have already prepared such a company, Mr. Albright replied with a confident voice. The plan was perfectly laid out. Pressure from both flanks, one to cut off his income, the other to drown him in debt. I was eager to see how Ethan would get out of this. While my grandfather and I made our first move, I didn't forget the most important task, to continue investigating Ethan's dark secrets. I firmly believed that in addition to what Mr. Albright had discovered, there must be other dark corners he was hiding. I remembered the times Ethan came home late with the excuse of work, meetings, smelling of alcohol, and an unfamiliar woman's perfume. I remembered the calls he took secretly on the balcony. My woman's intuition told me, besides me, Ethan has other shady relationships. I called Mr. Albright. Mr. Albright, could you investigate Mr. Hayes' personal relationships further, especially with women? I want to know how many other people he has deceived besides me. Mr. Albright nodded. Understood, Miss Sterling. The secret investigation resumed. This time, the target was not only his finances, but also his private life. A few days later, our actions began to take effect. Early in the morning, the Sterling Group's lawyer sent Ethan's company an official notice of contract termination. At the same time, the 3 banks sent Ethan a debt notification, informing him that his debt had been transferred to a new creditor, Atlas Financial Investments, the shell company we had created. I wasn't there, but I could imagine Ethan's face when he received two pieces of bad news at once. He would surely be frantically calling everywhere, trying to find out who Atlas Financial Investments was and why they were acting so swiftly and ruthlessly. He would never imagine that the person behind it all was the wife he had just abandoned. At the same time, Mr. Albright also brought the first information about Ethan's private life, and it was much more terrible than I had imagined. Miss Sterling, Mr. Albright began, placing a stack of photos on the table. Hayes didn't have just one mistress. According to our surveillance over the last 72 hours, he has been involved with at least 3 other women. I picked up the photos with hands trembling with anger. In the first photo, Ethan had his arm around a young model's waist at a luxury bar. In the second, he was leaving a 5-star hotel with a wealthy older businesswoman on his arm. In the third, he was tenderly feeding a young university student at a coffee shop. Each had a different charm, but one thing in common, they all seemed to be women with money and status. He wasn't just cheating on them for lust, Mr. Albright continued. He saw them as tools to be used. The model helped him access the entertainment world. That businesswoman is the president of a large construction company and could get him lucrative contracts. And that university student, her father, is an influential senior official. I put down the photos feeling nauseous. This man had no heart. He only had calculations and endless greed. He had turned his life into a chessboard, and every woman who came near him, including me, was just a pawn he used and discarded when they were no longer useful. This fact hurt me more than his betrayal. It showed his rotten and sick nature. Keep investigating, Mr. Albright, I said in an icy voice. I want to know everything about these women. I want to know how he scammed them. Perhaps it's time for victims like me to unite. A new, bolder plan began to form in my mind. I was not only going to destroy Ethan, but I was also going to unmask him in front of everyone he had deceived and continued to deceive. I was going to leave him with nowhere to hide. The trap was set, and the prey was starting to panic. But would these women be willing to cooperate with me? Or would they also blindly believe in this cunning man as I once did? This battle seemed much more complicated than I thought. While the storm I created was slowly gathering over Ethan on the other side of the city, in the cramped apartment, his family was indulging in a brief, fantastical joy. They had no idea what was coming. For them, kicking me out was a great victory. They had gotten rid of the daughter-in-law who couldn't have children, and more importantly, they thought they would soon achieve a life of wealth. As soon as I left, Carol rushed to call a distant relative who was a real estate agent. I need you to sell this apartment quickly, she said over the phone, her voice unable to hide her excitement. The price doesn't matter. Just make it fast. Oh, and you can arrange all the paperwork with my son, Ethan. This house is all his. She believed she had the right to dispose of my property, a property she legally had no right to. Chloe was even worse. She immediately moved into my bedroom, taking over the bed, the vanity, and the things I hadn't taken with me. She took selfies and posted them on social media with a suggestive caption, "Finally have my own room. Goodbye to what wasn't mine." She even bragged to her friends about the clothes and bags I had left behind, which didn't even fit her. Ethan, though initially surprised by my appearance at the house, quickly regained his confidence. He believed I was just angry, putting on a brave face after being abandoned. He couldn't imagine that I held all his secrets in my hands and was preparing a brutal counterattack. He told his mother and sister, "Mom, Chloe, don't worry. Sophia is kind and weak. She's all bark and no bite. I'll let her cool off for a few days at her grandfather's place, and then I'll go get her. By then, she'll have no choice but to obey me." He was still confident in his acting and manipulation skills. He believed a few sweet words, a few crocodile tears would melt my heart. They began to plan their future. With the money from the sale of the apartment, they would pay off the debts of Ethan's company, and with the rest, they would buy a villa in a wealthy area. Carol dreamed of going to the spa every day and going on luxury shopping sprees. Chloe planned a lavish wedding with her new rich boyfriend. They painted a beautiful future, a life of high society, but they didn't know that the foundation of that dream was built on lies and would soon crumble. Their euphoria peaked when a buyer appeared for the house. The agent Carol called, following Mr. Albright's instructions, quickly found a potential client. It was actually a Sterling Group employee posing as a new money tycoon, offering to buy the apartment quickly and at a high price. Hello, Mrs. Hayes. I'm from the real estate agency. One of our clients is very interested in your apartment. He's willing to pay $750,000 in cash this week. $750,000. The figure almost made Carol faint with joy. She hastily agreed without a second thought, urging Ethan to prepare the papers quickly. Hurry up, son. Opportunity has knocked on our door. With this $750,000, our family will completely change. Ethan was also happy, but he still had some sense left. He told his mother, Mom, calm down. The deed to the house is still in Sophia's name. I have to convince her to sign the transfer papers first. What's there to convince? Carol snapped. Tell her we need to sell the house urgently to pay your debts and avoid jail. She'll be so scared she'll sign it in tears. Just do as I say. As they reveled in the dream of $750,000, the first piece of bad news arrived. The notice of contract termination from the Sterling Group was delivered to the company. Ethan read the notice and was speechless. Those two contracts accounted for nearly 70% of the company's revenue. Without them, his company was almost nothing. He frantically called his contacts at the Sterling Group, but no one answered. He didn't understand why his old partner was acting so ruthlessly. He thought it was just an unfortunate coincidence. But soon, 3 letters from 3 different banks arrived at the same time: debt notification, notice of creditor transfer, and a demand for payment of all debts within 24 hours. Ethan read the name of the new creditor, Atlas Financial Investments Incorporated, a completely unknown name. He hurriedly searched online, but there was hardly any information about this company, only that it was an emerging investment fund with very strong capital and famous for its relentless work style. The real panic began. Ethan slumped into his chair. Sweat poured down his forehead like rain. He didn't understand what was happening. Why all the bad news was coming at the same time. He felt as if an invisible hand was strangling him. Carol and Chloe, seeing Ethan's pale face, began to worry. What's wrong, son? What's happening? Ethan, trembling, told them everything. The dream of $750,000, the dream of changing their lives, vanished in an instant like smoke, leaving only the cold reality of bankruptcy and debt. What do we do? What do we do now? Carol wandered around the house, muttering, How are we going to pay that money? Are we really going to be homeless? Chloe started to cry. And what about my wedding? I told all my friends I was getting married in a 5-star hotel. Her selfishness didn't change even at the most critical moment. In his desperation, Ethan suddenly thought of me. Yes, only Sophia Sterling could save him. Her grandfather was a billionaire. One word from her and everything would be solved. Once again, he clung to the lifeline he had discarded, hastily grabbed his phone, and dialed my number. He didn't know that the person who held his fate in her hands, the mysterious creditor Atlas, was me. He was preparing to beg his enemy. Ethan's call came while I was sitting in my office reviewing the latest report on the company's financial situation. Seeing his name on the screen, I didn't answer immediately. I let the phone ring. I let his nervousness and desperation resonate. Finally, I pressed the answer button, but said nothing. So, Sophia. Ethan's voice on the other end of the phone was trembling and pleading, completely different from his usual arrogance. Can we meet for a moment? I have something to tell you. Something very important. I remained silent. My silence seemed to terrify him even more. Sophia, please, just think of it as the last time. I was wrong. I'll explain everything. Please give me a chance. I continued to be silent. I wanted him to taste the helplessness, the feeling of having to beg someone else just as I had. Finally, I opened my mouth. My voice was cold and unfamiliar. I have nothing to talk to you about. Don't say that, Sophia. He almost shouted. My company is about to go bankrupt. They're hounding me with debts. Only you can save me. Oh, really? I said with a sarcastic tone. What does your company going bankrupt have to do with me? We'll be divorced soon. It has to do with it. A lot to do with it, he said hastily. It's all because of you. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't have gotten into this situation, Sophia. Help me just this once. I promise I'll pay you back for everything. I'll do whatever you want. I laughed. Even in this situation, he was still blaming me. I don't need anything, and I don't have the ability to help you, I lied without blinking. As you can see, I was also kicked out by you and your family, and I don't have a penny. Right now, I'm living off my grandfather's charity. My lie was the most painful blow. It crushed his last hope. He thought I was rich and powerful, and now I was telling him I was also a parasite. No, that can't be, he muttered in a desperate voice. Your grandfather, with all his wealth, he's not going to help you. That's my family's business and has nothing to do with you, I said firmly. I don't have time to talk to you. With that, I hung up. I knew this call would push Ethan's desperation to the limit. A cornered beast is capable of the greatest madness, and I was waiting for that. Would desperation make him reveal even more terrible secrets? Or would it turn into a blind hatred for me? The cat and mouse game had become much more dangerous. My cold rejection was like throwing a bucket of cold water on Ethan's last ember of hope. Desperation. Instantly transformed into blind rage. He could no longer think clearly. Instead of trying to solve the problem, he directed his fury at his own family. I didn't need to have anyone watch to imagine the scene that would unfold in that apartment. A monumental fight surely broke out. Ethan would blame Carol and Chloe, accusing them that their greed and ignorance had led him to a dead end. And Carol and Chloe, with their dreams of wealth shattered, would not stand idly by. They would accuse Ethan of being useless, incompetent, unable to control his wife and provide for his family. A family built on lies and self-interest. In the face of the storm, the first thing they did was tear each other apart. Just as I expected, a few hours later, Mr. Albright reported, Miss Sterling, the neighbors have reported a very loud fight at Mr. Hayes's home with sounds of things breaking. I smirked. Perfect. Let that fire burn brighter. While his family was mired in internal strife, I began to move my next piece. This time, the target was not just Ethan, but his entire network of scams. I called the 3 women Mr. Albright had investigated. The young model, Laura, the wealthy businesswoman, Mrs. Beaumont, and the university student, Emily. I didn't reveal my identity. I had Mr. Albright arrange individual meetings, posing as a journalist investigating romance scams in high society. All 3, after some hesitation, agreed to meet. Perhaps deep down, they also harbored suspicions about the perfect man that was Ethan. The first meeting was with Laura. We met in a high-end coffee shop. Laura appeared stunning, but her eyes betrayed fatigue. When I mentioned Ethan, she was very cautious at first, insisting he was a wonderful man and a successful entrepreneur. I wasn't in a hurry. I simply placed a file on the table. Miss Laura, this is the information we have gathered. I think you should take a look. Laura, out of curiosity, opened the file. Inside was evidence of how Ethan had used her fame to secure advertising contracts and then pocketed a significant portion of the commission. There was also an audio recording of Ethan telling a friend that Laura was an airhead who was easy to manipulate. As she read, Lara's face grew paler. When she finished, she clutched the file in her hands, and a flame of fury burned in her eyes. That son of a bitch, so he was just using me. The meeting with Mrs. Beaumont, the businesswoman, went similarly. Mrs. Beaumont was a sharp, experienced woman. At first, she didn't believe my words, but when I presented evidence that Ethan, through her, had secured a major construction contract and then used one of her own subcontractors to embezzle funds, causing serious quality issues and the risk of a major lawsuit, she completely broke down. She had entrusted the project of a lifetime to Ethan, not knowing he would stab her in the back. The last one was the naive university student, Emily. She was the one I felt most sorry for. Ethan had promised to marry her after graduation, ensuring her a bright future. She believed him and gave him everything. But when I showed her photos of Ethan with other women and played the audio recording of him bragging to his friends about conquering the daughter of an influential official, her rose-colored world shattered. She cried bitterly from pain and rage. 3 women, 3 different situations, but all united by the same pain, having been deceived by the same man. I not only showed them Ethan's true face, but also something more important. "You are not alone," I told them. "I am also one of his victims. But we can't just sit here and cry. We must unite and seek justice for ourselves." At first, they hesitated. They were afraid. Afraid of retaliation, of losing their reputations. But empathy and the flame of hatred united us. We formed an alliance of revenge. Each of us, using our own strengths and contacts, began to silently gather more evidence and prepare for the final attack. Laura, through her contacts in the entertainment world, started spreading negative rumors about Ethan's integrity. Mrs. Beaumont, using her experience and power in the business world, pressured the remaining partners of Ethan's company to also reconsider their collaboration. Emily began to exert subtle influence through her family. The net around Ethan was tightening. He began to face pressure not only from his creditor Atlas Investments, but also from the very people he had deceived. He started to be isolated, marginalized. His company was now a sinking ship. Meanwhile, I didn't stand idly by. I decided to deliver a public blow, a blow that would make it impossible for Ethan to ever hold his head up again. I contacted a prestigious business magazine and agreed to an exclusive interview. But the topic would not be my return, but the dark side of marriages in high society. I knew this interview would be a bombshell, and I was ready to light the fuse. This was no longer just my fight. It was a fight for every woman Ethan had deceived, and we were determined to win. What destructive power would the media bomb I was about to drop have? And cornered, what last desperate move would the beast Ethan Hayes make? The web my alliance and I had woven began to take effect much faster and more forcefully than I had anticipated. Ethan's company, already like a house on the verge of collapse, now had to withstand a storm blowing from all directions. The small partners, hearing the rumors about Ethan's integrity spread by Laura, began to grow uneasy. One after another, they made excuses to delay orders or demanded immediate payment of invoices. Mrs. Beaumont's company, one of his remaining major clients, sent an official communication requesting a full quality audit of the work done by Ethan's company, threatening to sue if any irregularities were found. His source of income was almost completely cut off. Meanwhile, on the other side, Atlas Financial Investments, that is, U.S., continued to increase the pressure. Ethan received dozens of calls and emails daily from the creditor demanding a concrete repayment plan. They rejected any proposal, negotiation, or extension, offering only one way out: pay or go to court. Ethan completely broke down. He ran from place to place, knocking on the doors of old acquaintances and partners to borrow money. But no one helped him. The name Ethan Hayes had become toxic in the business world. Everyone avoided him like the plague. Ethan's panic reached its peak. He no longer maintained his neat and sophisticated appearance. He was haggard, with a scruffy beard and eyes always bloodshot from lack of sleep and worry. And as an inevitable law, when the pillar of the house collapses, the internal cracks of the family become more apparent. The apartment, which once resonated with euphoric laughter, now only housed endless arguments. Carol, after seeing her dreams of wealth shattered, completely lost her patience with her son. She constantly blamed and harassed him. "My God, after all I've fed and raised you, look what you've become. You can't even hold on to your wife. The company is bankrupt and you're up to your neck in debt. What have you ever done right for this family?" Every meal became a torture. She complained about having to sell the few gold rings she had left to buy food, about not being able to go out for fear of people laughing at her. Chloe was no different. After her rich boyfriend left her a pawn. Hearing rumors that her family was on the brink of bankruptcy, she unleashed all her anger on her brother. "It's all your fault. Because of your incompetence, I'm in this mess. No wedding, no money, no face to show my friends," she screamed, throwing her plate on the floor. "Give me money. I don't care if you steal or kill. Just bring me money. Ethan's life was now a living hell. At the company, harassed by creditors and partners. At home, psychologically abused by his own mother and sister, the arrogant man, who thought himself smart and capable of controlling everything, was now helpless and miserable. He started drinking and drinking heavily. Every night he came home drunk, broke things, and then collapsed. The fall of a man was happening slowly but surely. Meanwhile, I was preparing my bombshell. The date for the interview with the business magazine was finally set. I reviewed the script with my grandfather, preparing for every question and every possible scenario. My grandfather advised me, you don't need to appear hurt or harsh. Just state the facts calmly. Sometimes the truth is the sharpest weapon. I understood what my grandfather meant. I wouldn't turn the interview into a personal venting session. I would turn it into a warning message, an inspiring story about the strength of women. The day before the interview, I received a call from an unknown number. I was going to ignore it, but the number called again insistently. Finally, I answered, "Hello." There was a long silence on the other end of the phone. Only heavy breathing could be heard. Then a hoarse, weak voice. "So, Sophia, it's me, Ethan." His voice sounded very strange. The confidence and anger were gone, leaving only extreme exhaustion and desperation. "What is it?" I asked, still in a cold voice. "I know I have no right to call you anymore," he said in a broken voice. "But I don't know who to talk to anymore. I feel like I'm going to die." "Oh, you're going to die." I frowned. What new trick was this? No, I'm not acting anymore. I'm too tired. He broke down and cried. It was the cry of a completely broken man. "I've lost the company. My friends are gone. My home is a hell. I have nothing left. I was wrong, Sophia. I know I was truly wrong. I lost the only woman who treated me with sincerity. I'm trash, a scumbag." He kept repeating words of self-blame and belated regret. I listened in silence. I felt no euphoria in my heart, only a strange emptiness. Watching a person fall from the top to the abyss, even if it's your enemy, is never pleasant. "What's the purpose of your call?" I asked, interrupting his crying. "I just wanted to hear your voice one last time," he said in a whisper. "And I have to warn you about something. Be careful of my mother. That woman is crazy. She said she wouldn't leave you alone." Ethan's warning surprised me a bit. That even in this situation, he thought to warn me. Was it out of a remaining shred of conscience or out of fear that if something happened to me, he would be the first suspect? "What is she planning to do?" I asked. "I don't know. I just heard her muttering to herself that she would teach you a lesson. That if she couldn't have it, she would destroy it. Sophia, you have to be very careful." With that, he hung up. The abruptly ended call left me with a mixture of complex emotions and a vague uneasiness. A greedy and ignorant woman like Carol. What madness would she be capable of when cornered? Ethan's warning, whatever his motive, was a reminder that this fight was not over yet. Sometimes the wounded beast is the most dangerous. Ethan's warning, though vague, was enough for my grandfather and me to heighten our vigilance. "A gambler who has lost all their money becomes reckless," my grandfather said with a sharp gaze. "Carol has nothing left to lose. We must not underestimate her madness." My grandfather immediately increased the security staff at the estate and ordered Mr. Albright to monitor Carol's every move 24/7. I also took extra precautions when I went out. The battle was nearing its end, and we couldn't afford any mistakes. On the day of the interview, I arrived at the studio with a completely different mindset. I was no longer a victim seeking sympathy. I was a warrior, a storyteller, and my story would be my weapon. The interview went exactly as I had prepared. Calmly and coherently, I revealed the whole truth. From my husband's fake bankruptcy, his family's conspiracy, to the truth about Ethan's organized scams. I didn't use harsh words. I simply presented the evidence, audio recordings, and bank statements. I also didn't forget to mention the alliance of women who had stood up with me. At the end of the interview, I officially announced the establishment of the Sophia Sterling Foundation, a foundation specializing in legal and psychological support for women who are victims of marriage scams and domestic violence. I want to turn my pain into action, I said, looking directly at the camera, so that no other woman has to go through what I went through. My interview had a tremendous impact. Not only did it completely change public opinion, but it also generated a strong wave of community support. Sophia Sterling and the Sophia Sterling Foundation became symbols of strength and women's rights. Meanwhile, Ethan's family had to endure the full force of the storm. The door to their apartment was besieged by journalists, and their phones rang off the hook with insulting and reproachful calls. They couldn't take a step outside. The loss of reputation was more terrible than financial ruin, but the contempt and anger of the public seemed to be the final catalyst that pushed Carol to her most demented act. That night, Mr. Albright called me with a very urgent voice. "Miss Sterling, something serious has happened. Carol has disappeared from home. Our people saw her take a taxi towards the outskirts, and she was carrying a gas can." My heart stopped. The outskirts. There was an old warehouse of the group there, an isolated and rarely frequented place. What was she planning to do? Are you following her? Yes, but she's very alert and keeps changing cars. We're following as best we can. But Miss Sterling, what worries me is that her target is you. I froze. Just then, I received a text message on my phone from an unknown number. "Sophia, if you want to save your grandfather, come to the warehouse on the outskirts alone. Don't call the police or you'll regret it." The message was accompanied by a photo. In the photo, my grandfather was sitting in a chair, his hands and feet tied and his mouth covered with duct tape. His face looked tired, but his gaze was still firm. I almost fainted. She had kidnapped him. That wicked woman had dared to touch the person I loved most. "Miss Sterling, are you all right?" I heard Mr. Albright's worried voice on the other end of the phone. "Mr. Albright, my grandfather. Carol has kidnapped my grandfather. She wants me to go to the warehouse alone." I barely managed to stay calm as I explained the situation. "You can't," Mr. Albright shouted. "You can't go alone. It's a trap. But I can't endanger my grandfather." "Miss Sterling, listen to me. The chairman has been through a lot in his life. He knows how to protect himself. Now is when you truly need to stay calm. Send me your location and the full text message. I will notify the police immediately and deploy our people to surround the area. Do as she asks, but don't forget that we will be right behind you." I did as Mr. Albright told me. The fear inside me gradually transformed into an icy hatred. "Carol, you have crossed the line." I drove alone towards the outskirts. As the night deepened, the road became more and more deserted. The car's headlights illuminated the darkness, and an old abandoned warehouse appeared before me. I parked the car and got out. The rusty iron door of the warehouse creaked open. Carol stood there with a lighter in her hand and the red gas can beside her. In the dim light, her face was horribly disfigured and crazed. "You came," she said with a chilling laugh. "I knew you would come." "Where's my grandfather?" I asked in an icy voice. "Inside. He's still alive." She smiled. "But how much longer he lives depends on your attitude." She stepped back, revealing the scene inside. My grandfather was tied to a wooden pillar in the center of the warehouse. Around him, she had poured a large amount of gasoline. "What do you want?" I asked, clenching my fists. "What I want?" She laughed like a maniac. "I want you to die. You've ruined everything I had. You took my son, my money, my honor. Now, I'm going to make you feel what it's like to lose the person you love most." "Are you crazy?" "Yes, I'm crazy." "You drove me crazy," she screamed, raising the hand with the lighter. "Now get on your knees, bow your head, and beg for my forgiveness, and transfer $250 million to my account. If not, with a single spark from this lighter, you and your grandfather will go to the next world together." She wanted to take us with her. She had nothing left to lose. I looked at her bloodshot, crazed eyes, and then I looked at my grandfather. He looked at me and shook his head slightly, as if signaling me not to do what she said. I knew he would rather die than give in to a villain. In this life-or-death crisis, I had to make a decision. A decision that would determine my fate and my grandfather's. I stared into Carol's crazed eyes, then looked back at my grandfather tied to the pillar. His gaze was still firm, shaking his head slightly as a signal not to give in. My heart pounded, but my mind was strangely calm. I knew that even if I gave in, she wouldn't keep her promise. Logic doesn't work on someone who has lost their sanity. "All right," I said. My voice was so calm, it surprised me. "I'll send you the money, but release my grandfather first." Carol let out a wild laugh. "Do you take me for a fool? So that as soon as I let him go, you'll call the police and have me arrested? No way. First, you send the money, and then we'll see." "If you don't trust me, how can I trust you?" I said, trying to buy time, quickly scanning the darkness, hoping the police forces were in position. "You're in no position to set conditions here," she snarled, her hand holding the lighter trembling. "I'll count to 3. If you don't send the money, I'll burn everything." 1. Her voice echoed sharply. "Wait," I shouted, feigning extreme panic. Okay, I'll send it. I'll send it right now." Pretending to tremble, I took out my phone and started tapping the screen, simulating the transaction. Carol watched me suspiciously. "How much have you sent?" "The $250 million. But such a large transfer takes a little time to process, and I need an authentication code. Give me a few minutes." I tried to give a plausible reason. 2. She had no patience. The flame of the lighter flickered to life, illuminating her crazed face. Just then, a black shadow emerged from behind her. Thud, a loud impact. Mr. Albright, who had stealthily approached at some point, struck the back of Carol's neck hard with a large wooden club. She fell unconscious without even a scream. The lighter flew out of her hand, and almost simultaneously, dozens of people burst in from the darkness. Armed police special forces surrounded the entire warehouse. "Miss Sterling, are you all right?" Mr. Albright rushed toward me. "I'm fine, grandfather." I ran to my grandfather. The police officers quickly untied his ropes. "I'm fine." I hugged him tightly, sobbing. My grandfather patted my back and said, his voice still weak but full of relief, "I'm fine." My granddaughter was very brave. It was all over in an instant. Carol, still unconscious, was handcuffed and taken away. Her final, most demented plot had failed completely. The kidnapping and attempted arson were the last straw, putting a tragic end to the story of the Hayes family. Carol, charged with multiple felonies, including kidnapping, death threats, and attempted arson, received a severe sentence. She would spend the rest of her life within the cold walls of a prison. Reflecting on her crimes, Ethan, upon learning of his mother's demented act, completely broke down. He dropped his appeals and silently accepted the sentence handed down to him. Perhaps deep down he realized that part of the blame for this whole tragedy lay with his own weakness, greed, and betrayal. Chloe, too, after a period of detention and investigation, had to face justice. Although she did not directly participate in the major conspiracy as an accomplice for concealment, she also received the punishment she deserved. The life of an idle young lady was over, replaced by prison labor. The fall of the Hayes family was a predictable conclusion, an inevitable consequence of greed and malice. They lit the fire themselves, and in the end, that fire consumed everything they had. After the storm passed, my grandfather and I returned to the estate. The house was still grand and luxurious, but the atmosphere was warmer and more peaceful than ever. My grandfather's health suffered a bit after the terrible ordeal, but his mind strangely cleared. He decided to no longer participate in the management of the group. "It's time for this old man to rest," he told me one sunny afternoon. "You have proven yourself. You've done much better than I expected. From now on, the Sterling Group is in your hands." On the day of my official appointment as chairwoman of the group, a grand ceremony was held. Standing on the stage, I looked at the hundreds of employees, partners, and people who believed in me. I no longer felt fear or pressure. I felt a great sense of responsibility and pride. I had not let down my grandfather's expectations, nor had I made my parents' sacrifice in vain. But success in business was not the only thing I achieved. Throughout the legal process, there was one person who silently supported me both legally and emotionally, Mr. Michael Davis. He was not only a competent lawyer from Mr. Torres's firm, but also a warm, understanding, and trustworthy man. We went through the most difficult times together, and gradually a special feeling developed between us. Love came to me for a second time, gently and peacefully. He was not overwhelmed by my family background or my wealth. He loved the person I was, my strength, and my perseverance. By his side, I could be myself, feel truly loved and respected. A year later, we held a small, warm wedding on a sunny, windy beach. We only invited family and the closest friends. My grandfather, in his wheelchair, took my hand and gave it to Michael. "Take good care of my Sophia," he said happily, with tears in his eyes. "She's been through so much." I looked at the man beside me, the person I would spend the rest of my life with. I smiled with genuine contentment. My life had gone through a great storm. That storm had swept away everything false and rotten, leaving in its place a clear blue sky and a dazzling dawn. That evening, after the party ended and all the guests had left, only my grandfather, Mr. Albright, Michael, and I remained in the living room. The atmosphere was quiet, with only the gentle murmur of the waves in the distance. My grandfather looked tired, but very happy. He looked at me with eyes full of affection. "Sophia, you finally found your peaceful harbor. Now this old man can rest easy." I took his thin hand, my heart filled with gratitude. "If it weren't for you and Mr. Albright, I don't know what would have become of my life. I owe you both my life." My grandfather smiled gently and waved his hand. "There are no debts between family. You are my granddaughter, the blood of the Sterling family. Protecting you is my responsibility." Mr. Albright, standing to the side, also smiled. "Seeing Miss Sterling happy is the chairman's greatest joy and mine." We sat together reminiscing about the past, not with bitterness or hatred, but with deep reflection. Every event, every pain was a lesson, a brick that built the person I am today. But deep in my heart, there was still an unresolved question. "Grandfather," I hesitated. "How did you know back then that Ethan Hayes was a bad person? How could you see someone's true nature with just one look?" My grandfather was silent for a moment. His gaze drifted to the night sea as if remembering a long-ago story. "I didn't know with just one look, child," he said softly. "Before you brought him home to introduce him to me, I had already had him investigated." I froze. "So, you already knew?" "Yes," he nodded. "I knew his family background was not as simple as he claimed. His father was a notorious gambler full of debts. His mother, Carol, was no saint either. I knew his approach to you was not a coincidence. But at that time you were head over heels in love. You wouldn't have believed a word I said. The more I opposed it, the more you would have wanted to follow him. That's why I had to give you that cruel ultimatum. I hoped that the hardships and deprivations of a normal life would bring you to your senses. But I didn't know you would be so strong and patient." Every word he said was like the last piece of a puzzle, completing the perfect picture. I burst into tears, not out of pain, but moved by his silent love and profound calculation. Even when I turned my back on him, he had always been watching over me and worrying about me. "And what about my parents?" I asked with a trembling voice. An old pain resurfaced. Was it also related to business conspiracies? My grandfather was silent for a long time. Even the sound of the waves outside seemed to hold its breath. "Yes," he finally admitted, his voice tinged with infinite sadness. "The accident that year was not a simple accident. It was a murder planned by our group's rivals. Your parents paid the price for my success." He closed his eyes, and a tear rolled down his wrinkled cheek. "That is the greatest regret of my life, Sophia. I couldn't protect my daughter and my son-in-law. That's why I had to protect you even more. I couldn't let that tragedy happen again." The final truth had been revealed. A terrible truth, but one that explained everything. I understood the burden my grandfather had carried for so many years. Why he was so strict, why he always tried to protect me. I hugged him tightly. "Grandfather, that's all in the past. My parents in heaven surely don't hold a grudge against you. Now you have me, Michael, and Mr. Albright. We embrace like that, grandfather and granddaughter, 2 generations sharing the pain and secrets buried for decades." That night, I understood that family is not just the place where we are born, but the place we return to after the storm, a sanctuary, always ready to protect and welcome us unconditionally. After the wedding, my life entered a new chapter, a chapter of true peace and happiness. Michael was a wonderful husband. He not only loved me, but also greatly respected my grandfather. He shared everything with me, from the group's affairs to the small things at home. By his side, I regained the feeling of being a normal woman, loved and protected. The Sophia Sterling Foundation under my leadership grew stronger and stronger, and we helped countless women, not only with material support, but also by restoring their faith in life. Each of their stories, each of their smiles was a great motivation for me. One day, I received an anonymous letter. The handwriting was clumsy. Out of curiosity, I opened it. To Mrs. Sophia Sterling Davis. I am Ethan's mother, Carol. I am writing this letter from prison. I do not expect your forgiveness. I just wanted to tell you one thing. I'm sorry. I was wrong. Greed blinded me. I destroyed my own family with my own hands. I pushed my son and daughter into prison. I regret it so much. Every night I dream about what I did. I see you crying in the middle of a winter night. I know there are no second chances. I just hope you live happily for us too, a sinner. After reading the letter, my heart was calm. I felt neither euphoria nor pity, only a sense of peace. All the resentment vanished with these words. The past was completely closed. Years later, when the turbulent waves of the past had completely receded, my life was flowing in the calm I had so longed for. Michael and I had a beautiful daughter. We named her Alma, hoping her life would always be serene and free. She was the embodiment of our love, our joy, a ray of sunshine that warmed the entire estate. My grandfather, though elderly, seemed to have been rejuvenated since the birth of his great-granddaughter. His greatest pleasure was to sit in his wheelchair every day and watch Alma babble and take her first steps in the garden. A smile of contentment never left his face. The Sterling Group, under my leadership and with Michael's support, grew even more solid. We focused not only on profits, but also on sustainable values and community activities. The Sophia Sterling Foundation also became a trusted institution, a common refuge for thousands of women across the country. Sometimes I would hear news of people from the past. They said that Ethan, after serving his sentence, lived alone, unattached, doing odd jobs to survive. His former sophisticated and elegant appearance was gone, and he had aged a lot. Chloe, after getting out of prison, also couldn't find a stable job. The hard life had stripped her of her luxurious habits and turned her into a quieter, more reserved person. I was no longer interested in them. Their lives, the paths they chose, were their own responsibility. The old hatred had completely disappeared. All that remained was the indifference one feels for a stranger. One weekend afternoon, our family was gathered in the garden. Michael was patiently teaching Alma how to ride a bicycle while my grandfather clapped and cheered from the side. I, sitting on a swing, was reading a book and watching them with a smile. The scene was truly peaceful and happy. Suddenly, Mr. Albright approached with a somewhat serious expression. "Ma'am, someone wants to see you." "Who, Mr. Albright?" I asked. "Mr. Ethan Hayes." I froze. Ethan, after so many years, why was he here to see me? "Tell him I'm not here," I replied coldly. I didn't want anything from the past to disturb my current life. But he says it's a very important matter related to Mrs. Carroll's last will. Mr. Albright hesitated. Carroll had passed away in prison from an illness a few years ago. Her last will? Curiosity piqued me, but I was also filled with suspicion. "Where is he?" "He's waiting outside. The main gate." I thought for a moment. "All right, bring him to the small parlor. Don't let my grandfather and the others know. I don't want to break the family peace." I went into the small parlor. Ethan was sitting on a sofa. He was much thinner and tanner, with gray hair dotting his head. He looked much older and more worn than his age suggested. Seeing me enter, he stood up awkwardly and kept his head down, not daring to look me directly in the eyes. "Hello." His voice was faint and low. "What are you doing here?" I asked, maintaining a safe distance. "I came to fulfill a final promise I made to my mother." He took a faded wooden box out of an old cloth bag with trembling hands and placed it on the table. "Before she died, my mother asked me to return this to you." My mother said she had wronged you and your parents. She said this was the only memento she had of their friendship. Out of curiosity, I opened the box. Inside was an old photo album and a few yellowed letters. I turned the first page of the album. There were photos of my mother and Carol when they were young. They were hugging and smiling brightly. I was stunned. How is this possible? My mother and your mother, they were once best friends, Ethan said bitterly. This fact was like a lightning bolt to me. I flipped through the letters. They were letters my mother had written to Carol talking about life, love, dreams. In one letter, my mother wrote, "Susan, I think I will have to go to a faraway place soon. I entrust my Sophia to you. Treat her as if she were your own daughter. If later Sophia and Ethan have a destiny together, that will be my greatest happiness." So that was it. Not only were they friends, but my mother had entrusted me to Carol. Asterisk, but why? Why did she treat me like that? Asterisk, because of greed and jealousy, Ethan replied as if reading my thoughts. My mother always envied your mother's wealth and happiness. When your mother died, she deliberately cut off all contact and hid this relationship. She wanted you to live in suffering. That way, she could feel pleasure. And when I met you, my mother saw an opportunity. The opportunity to snatch everything she thought your mother had taken from her. I closed the album. My mind a whirlwind of emotions. The tragedy of my life ultimately originated from the resentment of a previous generation. How absurd and tragic. Why are you telling me this? I looked Ethan directly in the eyes. To ask for forgiveness? Ethan shook his head, and a bitter smile appeared on his lips. No, I dare not ask for your forgiveness. I just wanted you to know the whole truth. I've lived in lies and guilt for too long now. I just want to live in peace. By returning these memories to you, I consider my last debt paid. He bowed to me again, turned silently, and left. I watched his lonely back, and in my heart there was no longer hatred, but a vague compassion. Everyone must pay for their mistakes. It's just that the price they paid was too high. I took the album in my hands and looked again at my mother and Carol, smiling radiantly in the photo. Perhaps in another world, they could have resolved all their resentments and become friends again. The unexpected encounter with Ethan and the truth about my mother and Carol's relationship closed the final chapter of the past. It was as if the last piece of the puzzle had fallen into place, completing the full picture of my life with its bright sides and tragic dark corners. I no longer felt resentment or blamed myself. I learned to accept and forgive, not for them, but so that I could move forward lightly. My life returned to its peaceful course, work at the group, projects for the Sophia Sterling Foundation, and above all, my small family. Every day was like a gift. I cherished every moment with Michael, watching my daughter Alma grow and seeing my grandfather smile. That was the most precious wealth, something no money could buy. What parts of this story resonated most with you, and how do you think we truly break cycles of resentment and pain in our own lives? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.